Hi everyone, I'm Nick and this is Mainely Watches. Thanks for joining me again. If you're new here, welcome, and if you're a return viewer, thank you for joining us again. Last episode we looked at a watch from DOXA, the SUB 300 reissue, and prior to that we looked at the DOXA SUB 200. Today I promised you that we would look at another DOXA, and we will take a dive into the DOXA SUB750T. Now this is a 20-year-old watch. This watch is from 2005. It's my first DOXA, and actually it was my first mechanical watch. It's a very special watch for me. I've had this watch many years. It's been with me everywhere and bears the battle scars to prove it. So, keep in mind it's not a new watch, but I think this is a very relevant piece of DOXA history, and that's why I wanted to do this video, because a lot of what this watch represents, I think, you can see in today's DOXA lineage and their current lineup. Particularly in the 300T and the 1500T that DOXA have right now. So I think it's an important watch, and it was a milestone for DOXA at the time, part of DOXA's rebirth, when DOXA really started making watches again and becoming popular. So I think we're going to get a bit into the history of this guy. Like I said, this is a special watch for me, and I really wanted to get this video out here. They do pop up from time to time on the secondary market, so you can still find the 750s. It's a really cool watch, and I think it kind of expresses everything that DOXA is and what DOXAs are about. So let's turn back the clock and go back to 2005 and take a look at the DOXA 750T. The DOXA SUB 750T is this DOXA's unsung hero. This is my personal watch for the last 20 years. I bought this watch in 2005, and I've really been anxious to make a video about this guy, because it's a very special watch to me. This watch has been on my wrist for many years and bears the battle scars to prove it. But I think we have to go back a little in the DOXA story, which I briefly touched on in my past videos on the DOXA SUB 300 and the DOXA SUB 200. I told you I was going to be doing a series on DOXAs. So I think it's important to touch on this watch. History is full of forgotten heroes, and by the mid-1980s, the DOXA SUB had fallen into relative obscurity. There was very little need for dive watches once modern dive computers became cheap and reliable, and the quartz generation of the 80s really decimated many watch brands like DOXA. And, consequently, DOXA refocused their product line, and they cut a lot of the subs out. They went back into making quartz watches and dress watches. Aubrey, of course, had DOXA through the 80s. But the watch, the DOXA SUB, really continued to live on through the novels from Clive Cussler, and on the risk of his action hero Dirk Pitt. And this watch was featured in his books since the early 70s. Things began to change, however, when the Jenny family took over the helm of DOXA from Aubrey in 1999. And then we have a gentleman named Rick Marai who enters the scene. Mr. Marai's involvement really helped steer the company to their newfound success using e-commerce at the turn of the 2000s. And he was also the driving force behind the rebirth of the brand and the subsequent re-editions that DOXA has released. The first re-edition, and now we'll fast forward to 2002. DOXA released the SUB 300 re-edition. The reissue was released, and people started talking about the DOXA again. The SUB 300 was unmistakably a DOXA sub, but of course it had a unique case and bracelet design. But it showed the world that DOXA was back, and they were hot. DOXA needed to act pretty quickly, and they started with another re-edition. So in late 2003, they released the SUB 600T. And the SUB 600T was very similar in size to the original 300T from 1968. Now, the 600T release of 2003 is not to be confused with the 600T reissue that we have today, and that was based on the Aubrey 600T, and that's the more squared off contemporary looking watch with the 4 o'clock crown, and DOXA still got it on the market today. But the SUB 600T really looked a lot like the 300T. The watch was featured on the wrist of Matthew McConaughey in the movie Sahara from 2005, as he played Dirk Pitt, the Clive Cussler's adventure heroine. And I think it's fair to say that Clive Cussler's books and the movie really did save the DOXA sub from obscurity. So the 600T was a pretty hot release, and like I said, that came out in 2003, and it was a re-edition of an earlier SUB 600. 2005, suddenly DOXA releases the SUB 750T, and that's the watch we see here today. It was just a little over a year since the release of the 600T, but DOXA was hot. They were, riding a high after the movie, which brought DOXA into popularity, and with Murai's work on getting DOXA into e-commerce. For the first time, you could order a watch online, and that was really something for the Swiss watch industry, because they were, very old-fashioned up to this point. If you wanted a watch, you had to go into a boutique and purchase it, and of course, DOXA did not have a large retail network. So things really started to change for DOXA once they got into e-commerce. And, with Mr. Murai's involvement and pushing these subsequent re-editions. So enter into 2005, and the 750T is released. This watch had the largest dial ever produced in a DOXA. The dial measures in at 31 millimeters across, so it was a very big dial for a DOXA. It really was a vintage 300T on steroids. This watch measures 45 millimeters wide. That's, without the crown. 47 millimeters lug to lug. And the thickness is 13.7. So actually quite a thin watch for its size. And you've got a 21 millimeter lug width. By comparison, just for the dimensions, today's contemporary 300T, that watch measures in at 42.5 millimeters, so 2.5 millimeters smaller diameter, 44.5 millimeter lug length, so about 2 millimeters shorter, and a thickness of 13.6, so about the same thickness. The contemporary SUB750T that DOXA sells today, I think, is very similar to this watch. The 1500T is measuring the same diameter, 45, 47 lug length, and that same 21 millimeter lug width, which, yeah, it's one of the DOXA quirks, bit of an odd number. The sub 1500, though, is quite a bit thicker. I think it's around 16 and a quarter millimeters. So it's a bigger watch. But nevertheless, this watch has a lot of that DOXA DNA in it, and I think you see that carried into today's modern lineage with DOXA. And I thought that's why this is an important watch to discuss, because it actually may have been a halo watch for DOXA. It really represented, at the time, the direction DOXA was going with their reissues, and was really the first of the contemporary DOXAs in terms of its size and dimensions. Because the watch industry started trending towards bigger cases, and DOXA, they just followed along like the others, going with larger watches. But unlike a lot of other watches, the Sub 750 hit its size well by being quite thin in the mid case, and as a result, it's a very comfortable watch to wear. It is relatively thin and has a fairly flat case back, so it just hugs the wrist. On my wrist today, I have a Synchron Poseidon. This is the black edition. Now, there is an interesting backstory with the Synchron. The measurements of this watch are pretty much the same as today's contemporary Sub 300T. It's 42.5 millimeter diameter, 45 millimeter lug length. It's a little bit thicker, though. This is comes in at 14, just over 14 millimeters thick, but it wears very similar to the current generation Sub 300T. There is a tangible link with the Synchron Poseidon and the famed DOXA Army. In fact, Synchron released a version which they called the military, which was since replaced by the Poseidon. But the DOXA DNA and heritage is there, and that was all brought back to life by Rick Murai, who is now behind Synchron after he left DOXA. So it's hard not to see the similarity between the current generation Synchrons and the DOXAs that Rick Murai was really responsible for releasing. I think the 750T, if we look at this watch, it's probably closer to the Sub 300T reissue than the 2003 600T in many ways. It's hard to say if the 750 is really the forefather of the contemporary Sub 1500T or the 300T, but the DNA is there. And you can see that as the sub line has continued to evolve. If we look closely at this watch, you have the traditional DOXA bezel, and you've got the no decompression scale. Typical of DOXAs, you don't want to polish these bezels. They are highly polished stainless, and if you polish them, you will wear them down. They are scratch magnets, so if you're somebody who does not like scratches on a watch, probably a DOXA SUB 300 or 1500, the current generation, are not for you, because this polished bezel will attract scratches. That also gives the watch its character, and honestly, I'm not bothered by getting all the dings and knocks on them. The older DOXAs, and I don't know if the newer ones will exhibit the same issue, but the numbering, the paint, tends to just flake off and wear off. And again, that's kind of common with the Doxas. Now, keep in mind, this is a 20-year-old watch, and it has not been babied. This watch has seen a lot of hard wear, and it certainly stood up remarkably well. Classic orange professional dial, date window. Movement is ETA ETA 2824-2. DOXA did come out with a COSC certified version of the 750T. This is not a COSC certified version, but it is keeping COSC standards. When I put it on my time grapher, it still keeps excellent time. This watch has been serviced twice. I think I've had it in for service, just maintenance, cleaning and lubrication. If we flip the watch around, the case back, you can see you have the Jennyfish. This one has Clive Cussler Professional Edition, and it's numbered out of 5,000 watches, and all the usual data they put on the back of the watch. Water resistance is 750 meters on the SUB750T. Screw-in case back, screw-in crown. The crown is signed with Jennyfish, and yeah, typical DOXA bezel. Bezel action. Very nice and crisp. Not much back play on this one. It's pretty tight. And again, this is a 20-year-old watch, so things are worn, but yeah, it's actually it's tight. Perfect alignment, no complaints there. It's a special watch to me. Like I said, this watch has been through a lot. I'm not wearing it on the original DOXA Beads of Rice bracelet. Right now I have it on a Artem Hydroflex. Very glad that they make this in a 21mm width strap, but it is absolutely comfortable on this strap. The DOXA Beads of Rice bracelet is typical DOXA bracelet of the time. The links are screwed. The clasp is nothing special. It's got a fold-out diver's extension and a couple micro adjust holes. It's certainly a nice bracelet, all polished. And I do tend to swap it out and wear it on the bracelet at times. But for now, I found this Hydroflex very comfortable strap on this watch. It's not a particularly difficult watch to wear because of that flat case back. It sits very nicely on your wrist. I would have to say this watch is actually more comfortable on the wrist than the 300T. And again, it's just that profile, the flat case back, and it's being relatively thin. So it is a very comfortable watch. I still think this watch is closest to the contemporary SUB 1500T that DOXA sells today. I see a lot of the 750 in the new 1500. Sorry about that. I just had to clean the watch up because I realized I was getting fingerprints all over it. So yeah, it's a unique watch, and I think it really could be DOXA's unsung hero. A lot of the DNA from this watch, I think, has carried over to the new lines that DOXA has. There are a lot of similarities with the current generation 300T and also the SUB 1500T. Like I said, this watch wears very comfortably, and I think it might be one of the best DOXAs that they've ever made. I would really love it if DOXA did a reissue of the SUB750T. I think it really strikes a sweet spot between their current 300 and 1500s. Nevertheless, that's my my SUB750T. Next episode, we're going to look at yet another DOXA reissue from around that same era. I've got a DOXA Deco that we will take a look at. And at some point, I think we'll also have to talk a little bit about Synchron, because the story of Synchron and DOXA are they are interwoven, like it or not. Like I said, the man behind the modern day Synchron, it was also behind the DOXA subs. So we're going to have to get into that story. As I said, this watch really wears much the same as the 300T. Not really any difference in the size, but we'll save that story for another day. As always, guys, if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to my channel. These videos are not sponsored. They're just my own opinions, and I just enjoy talking watches. I thought the 750 was important to share because there are actually not many videos out on YouTube about the 750. Of course, it's a 20-year-old watch. It's not something that you can buy anymore, so it's probably not that popular. But I think it tells an important story because it tells the backstory of DOXA, and part of where DOXA is today is because of all these reeditions that DOXA came out with. So there is a fascinating history behind it. One thing's for certain, this watch will never leave my wrist. You can find 750Ts on the secondary market. They do pop up every once in a while. They're not exceedingly common, but every once in a while I'll see them pop up on eBay or Chrono24 in various states. But keep your eyes open. If you're looking for what is now a vintage watch, I guess 20 years old, it's makes it classified as vintage. They're really unique watches. So without that, guys, I'm going to let you go. I wish you to stay safe out there, and as always, thank you for watching, and join me on my next episode where we'll look at another vintage DOXA re-edition. Thanks for watching Mainely Watches, and we'll see you guys later.